So the AI cliff is definitely an observable thing. The LLM will essentially get you to a point of where it's working, it's working, it's working, it's working, and you keep asking it for more and more, and then suddenly it stops being able to deliver. And that cliff happens. It happens later than the people who hate AI think it does, but it happens sooner than the people who love AI think it does. So somewhere in the middle, that thing's going to stop working. And there's no amount of really tricks or anything that you can do to fundamentally improve that.
Welcome back to another episode of Dev AI. Today's episode is not about speed or productivity hacks. It's not about Copilot versus Cursor. We are digging into something deeper, something more human. What happens to trust in engineering teams when anyone can generate impressive looking code with AI? When a junior dev ships a complex looking patch, how do you know if they actually understand it? My guest is Jay Matt, an engineering leader at American Airlines and author of a thought provoking blog on how AI, specifically LLM, may be quietly eroding the trust structure that we have long relied on as engineers, reviewers, and leaders. We'll unpack what he calls the AI cliff, explore the hidden burdens placed on reviewers, and ask a tough question: how do you preserve trust in a world of probabilistic code generation? Jay, thanks so much for joining today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, why don't you give us a quick intro about yourself and what do you do? Any background you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, sure. Howdy. So my name is Jay. I'm a principal engineer at American Airlines. I run our Kubernetes as a service platform. So our shared infrastructure is my main dealio. I deal with the orchestrations and the developer surface area for our app teams to deploy applications at scale.
Awesome. Now, you wrote this blog title, Yes, I Will Judge You for Using AI, which is both hilarious and provocative. But the post goes way deeper than the title. I know you're not an anti AI person. You're acknowledging that LLMs are part of the landscape now. So let's start with what motivated you to write this piece. With your experience leading engineering teams, what are the real issues you are trying to bring attention to?
I think the thing that made me want to write the blog and frankly start writing at all was that I observed this dynamic affecting my teams. I observed it affecting the open source community. I observed it affecting other teams at the company. And really what it was, I observed the burden of review being much higher with teams that had heavy emphasis on LLM generation. And what I realized was that in standard engineering, and this is all engineering, not just software or really any professional field, there are markers in a given person's work that really tells someone else evaluating this work if this person is a professional, how experienced they are. You watch a chess player play, you can guess if a professional chess player can guess if another person's a professional chess player in like 4 moves. Like there are very subtle markers. What I observed was that these LLM code bases or these LLM PRs made it really difficult to upfront tell what someone's skill level was. The markers became far muddier. And when the markers become far muddier, I observed that you couldn't rely on, if you can't trust the marker, then you have to fall back to no trust. And if you fall back to no trust, then your review has to come from a place of no trust, which means it just takes longer. You have to think about it more. And over time, this feeling, this animosity built up and built up, and I ended up blogging about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So your basic argument is that trust is the foundation of how engineering team function, like especially in code review, architecture discussions, and mentoring. Basically, but the trust relies on an assumption. If someone is writing a code, working code, they probably understand it.
Yeah, and generally it's obviously that's the trust aspect, but the other thing is that you had certain markers of competency. So if you're writing, let's say a complex Rust code base, and someone offers you a PR with 5 to 700 lines of TalkIO async Rust, it's unlikely that they got to that point without at least understanding a little bit of what that did, like understanding how the runtime works, understanding different borrowing semantics. So your marker there is the existence of this and the fact that it compiles. With LLMs, that marker is no longer there because it's very possible for an LLM to generate something like that at the surface level that does compile and does look good at the surface level. But without someone there that actually understands it, how do you know that they didn't make some much more subtle error? So you have to go find out for yourself. Normally, if you have a competent engineer doing that, there are different things that you just assume that mistakes are not going to make. That doesn't mean you don't kind of poke at it, but you don't really delve in and delve hard.
Yeah, so basically you're saying that the impact on the senior engineers and reviewers is much higher, right? Because you
Yes.
can't just assume that just because the code is compiling, it's actually going to work, it's actually done properly, or is done for the standards or safeguards.
Yeah, so that's definitely the vibe. It's syntax structure, variable name usage. There's a bazillion things that just tell someone who's very experienced that someone else has also been there and done that. And LLMs give anyone the ability to appear like they've been there and done that, but they really miss the reason that people have been there and done that and do it this way.
Yeah, I
So
think it's definitely very difficult to figure out from a reviewer point of view, like where do you, how much effort you have to put into evaluating it, right? It's a lot of burden. Now you generate, as you said, 700 lines of code. Now, who's going to review that 700 lines of code manually?
So in terms of the review for 700, at least the way that my teams work, it doesn't matter if it's 700 or 1,000. It has to be run, pulled down, reviewed line by line. Like there is no kind of rubber stamps, at
Hmm.
least on my team, right? So
Yeah,
you put out more code, increasing the burden on everyone. So all the little shortcuts of where can I skip, how can I skip, were very important.
absolutely. And the most interesting piece of your article that I thought was interesting was the AI cliff concept you talked about. So
Yeah.
what is it? And I think that's definitely, I'm saying to myself, what is it and why is it so dangerous in practice?
Yeah, so the AI cliff, and I don't know if I'm coined this or not. I haven't seen anyone else say it. But it's definitely an observable thing. You'll see a lot of discourse about it online, is that LLMs have a few problems. Obviously they are a general language model trained on a corpus, whatever. And then they have a context window. And the context window is the sum of their attention span. And within the context window is where they can generate the next token from. If you exceed the context window, the model has nothing to fall back on. The model has lost that ability to use that token as a part of its statistical model. Not only that, though, even with models like Gemini, where there's over a million token of context, they're still compressing at the top level. So you start to lose your context before you hit your context cap. And there's an exponential scaling law with the amount of context you can fit. Like it's not infinite. You keeps going up and up with how much power you need, how much speed you need. So in any project with, this quote unquote vibe coding or copilot or whatever, you don't even have to have it do a full agentic workflow. You'll see the same effect with any decently large file is that the LLM will essentially get you to a point of where it's working, and you keep asking it for more and more, and then suddenly it stops being able to deliver. And that cliff happens. It happens later than the people who hate AI think it does, but it happens sooner than the people who love AI think it does. So somewhere in the middle, that thing's going to stop working. And there's no amount of really tricks or anything that you can do to fundamentally improve that. You can modularize your code, you can chunk it here, you can chunk it there. But here's the problem. If you're someone who's newer or not experienced, how do you know how to modularize and chunk it? You don't. You've completely been left without an oar. Like you paddled out and you now have no oar. One of the things about programming before LLMs was that there's all this joke about Stack Overflow. You copy paste your way through things. And there was an aspect of that. But Stack Overflow ran out of copy pasting things way before the LLM will. So let's say you get 10x the distance. It's the same problem. It's not a new problem. It's just now it lets you get way further before you're screwed. So
Yeah, you're way, you're able to generate fairly long, fairly good features and functionality, but then I think you said when you get into newer areas where it doesn't know a lot of information about or
no,
complex.
not even information. It'll lose the context of your existing thing. So
Mm.
it will forget that it does something, and it'll either go re-implement it, or it'll go change a file and break something else.
Yep.
Like it loses its own code, and then it's up to you to figure out what it's done. And if
Yeah.
you had written it, well, then errors are not easy to fix, but generally you know where to look. If you're agentic coding through something, you might not have that same level of information. So when you hit that cliff, are you really saving time if you then have to go spend hours or days to go retrace through the code the agent generated?
I definitely went through it. I just spent like a whole day trying to figure out what, because every time I make a change, it's breaking. Have you experienced it yourself? I mean, are you seeing your team hit it in sort of real world use cases?
So in terms of the agentic thing, I haven't played the most with it, and I don't allow my team to use it.
Okay.
We have Copilot, but that's not the agentic one. I've certainly seen Copilot itself lose its own context and try to re-implement something somewhere else. In fact, one of those events was one of the main drivers for the blog post. I was like, well, if I can't trust this thing to generate this here, how can I trust my team to use it? Because I caught this, but how do I know they will?
Got it. So,
So
yeah, go ahead.
yes, I have experienced it.
Excellent. So you talk about like your implicit trust cues are not there anymore, right? You can't rely on the implicit trust cues. How do you then go about in your team, for example, where there's a mix of senior people and junior people? How do you
Yeah.
go about like implementing some sort of a way to navigate this in practice?
No, so I think that's a great question. It's kind of the $1 million one here, right? Because I mean, cat's out of the bag, right? We're
Yeah.
probably never going to go back to the other way. I think an important thing about this for anyone that's kind of read this and disagreeing is that in a perfect world, this isn't a problem. Like in a perfect world, you have all above board people, very high trust, close knit team. They are all rely on each other to not push something that they don't fully and innately understand. In a perfect world, that is how this will work. And it's the same reason that Stack Overflow isn't a problem on those teams. LLMs won't be a problem on those teams. Right? However, that's not the real world. That's not every team. Every team, depending, can be large, it can be small, but you can have people that you can have juniors that maybe are a little too enthusiastic to get something out there. You can have experienced engineers who are maybe a little too burnt out, say, to speak, right? Like there's, real world stuff happens. So how do you know what someone's state is?
Yeah.
I think that the markers become a lot more of in-person talking, whereas before it was a lot of asynchronous stuff, and I could rely on the code itself to tell me a story. I can't do that as much, so now I have to meet with you and have you tell me the story of it. And if you wrote it, then that's no problem. But if you maybe don't understand the story, then you won't have a story to tell.
Yeah, that's
And
an
which is,
expensive. That's an expensive in a large team, right? With time zones and everything else. Like, how do you try to
yeah,
coordinate these conversations? I think
and it's even more aggressive in open source communities,
yeah, I was gonna
right?
go there. I mean, like, you're now dealing with different companies, different people, different skill set, and a pull request comes in. Like, do you trust it? I mean, then you end up spending hours trying to figure out whether you should accept it or not, and you don't even know this
Yeah.
person.
So I think in many ways that they're a well done PR. You might not be able to tell. There are definitely tells with different code bases that an LLM generated it. If it looks too LLM, then you take a closer look. But in general, I think that there's just an aspect of trust that will never be regained.
All right, let's shift gears to solutions. Like, what teams should do about it. I know you said it's probably the $1 million question, but in your blog you talked about a few options, for example, or a few suggestions rather. A CLA declaration, mandatory code understanding policies, meta tagging,
Yeah.
LLM generated code, or even onboarding rules for juniors. So, which other things
Yeah.
or what do you
I
think?
think it's probably going to be it's going to be very per team dependent. Like and it's going to be per product because there are products in this field that are fine with some level of breaking or maybe not the best output. They just need to get it out there fast. So it's going to depend on the product. It's going to depend on your sensitivity. It's going to depend on your criticality. I think a few of the interesting ones here is that I have a feeling that for the companies that are still hiring juniors, you're going to see them not have access to LLM tooling, at least to start, to evaluate their ability to do it without the LLM. Because we know that there is a cliff, that the LLM will eventually lose its context. You're not going to throw the LLM into the Linux code base and expect it to fully contribute. So juniors are going to have to be evaluated in absence of that. And you see that in the hiring field right now. There's very explicit, you may not use ChatGPT for various technical interviews. And then we're going back to on-sites for various things. Like people want to remove the LLM from the loop to evaluate you. So, and then they'll kind of work it back in.
It completely makes sense. I mean, you can't know anymore. Anyway, evaluate a good engineer from sort of a junior engineer who looks like a good engineer. If you just look at the code itself,
Yeah.
totally makes sense.
And there's
Yeah, go
definitely
ahead.
an aspect of, you can say, well, this is just a tool, like a calculator. What you should just evaluate people on their ability to use it. I think the important thing here is that you can go so far with these LLMs that it can be hard to evaluate someone quick enough. Like eventually you'll be able to tell, but you can shorten the feedback loop by removing the access to it temporarily. So at least that's one of my predictions for how things will go.
There's a great suggestions there. Are there any teams or communities in the open source, for example, already trying to do this that you know of? Any interesting ideas?
In terms of ideas for how to deal with it, I think right now we're somewhat at the confusion and anger stage still. We're definitely seeing some communities take hardline anti-AI stances, and it turns into a little bit of a witch hunt for new members that maybe have some code that looks too LLM, or maybe it's a little too verbose in some ways. I don't fully know if people have recognized the problem at a deep enough level to take technical action for it.
Yeah.
I believe there's some CLAs that you have to sign that I attest that this work is mine and I fully understand it. But a lot of those are coming, a lot of the current action is more around the legalities of LLM code. There's a lot of open source projects that are unwilling to take on the risk of somehow the US government or some government saying that this code is not copyrightable, therefore it's not covered over the open source license. There's a lot of legal concerns that places are taking. The trust aspect is, I think, just leading to more anger right now. It's not fully hit the, okay, well, now this is a full problem we need to solve type of thing.
Got it. Yeah. In my organization, we don't use it to generate to contribute to the open source project. So that sort of makes sense. So I know the LLMs are here to stay, right? This is like you said, that the cat is out of the bag now, right? And so
Yeah.
we have this problem. And do you think that the industry will be able to adapt over time, I guess? New tooling that could come to automatically maybe detect some of these things?
I think what's going to happen is some of the similar things that have happened when web dev got big, then Java got big in the 90s, C took over for assembly, is that as with every kind of leap like this, the general community kind of stratifies itself, so to speak. So you're going to get a whole lot of new people in that join for the vibe coding, agentic, spin up a quick site, etc. And then you're going to have other people that stratify into the I will never use this at all. I want to write it all by hand. I want to be completely pure. And then you're going to have some people that are somewhat in the middle that go pretty deep and maybe use it for the most boilerplate of tasks, but generally kind of elide it. And I think you're going to find these communities are going to be somewhat like maybe say Vim and Emacs, old tabs and spaces. They're not going to like each other too much. And it's going to very much depend on the domain. So I think web dev or front end sites are going to be, you're going to have different standards there than you will in, say, distributed backend programming or low level systems programming. I think you're just going to see people really coalesce into their groups and not look outside as much, is my prediction for how this is going to eventually go. But I don't think that LLMs or agentic is going to become the next thing that everyone has to do. At least I don't see that as happening. I think it's going to be a choice that some people will choose to use, and then other people are going to judge them for it. And then they're going to judge the people who don't use them for being old school, VS Code versus Vim, all that stuff. So I don't see it as being the only way forward. I just think it's going to be another tribal, so to speak.
All right. And finally, if you could snap your fingers and change one thing about how dev teams handle AI generated code today, what would it be?
It's a good one. Truly, for how I run my teams and for how I relied on programming pre LLMs, I'd snap my fingers and tell teams not to rely on LLM code at all. I get the most value from LLMs out of conceptualizing various higher level concepts,
Mhm.
discussing with them about if a given idea is
Yeah.
really bad or really good, or saying, here's an idea I have, give me four other possible implementations or ideas. So like ideating with an LLM can be really useful. I have gotten burned by various code outputs enough that the subtle nuances that I require in a
Yeah.
code review or in
Yeah.
code,
Yeah.
LLMs don't grasp it. I've had some PR reviews that I know someone used an LLM, and the review ended up taking four times as long, and we had to rewrite the entire thing by hand because the code wasn't bad, but it wasn't done. It missed the nuance of the rest of the code base. And the way that I do reviews and the way that what my team works on, it wasn't going to work.
You're absolutely right that there could be a lot of value, in the ideation phase, even the architecture phase, or even the UI UX phase. There's a lot you can do, right? Without actually touching that final core. So it totally makes sense. So Jake, this has been the most important conversation in my mind we have had on Dev AI. It's not about what AI can do, it's about what we lose when you stop requiring developers to understand what they ship. If you're watching and you've reviewed AI generated code that gave you pause, or you've seen trust erode on your team, drop a comment below. And as always, like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more Dev AI episodes that go beneath the surface of AI in software. Thanks, Jay, for joining, and thanks for the viewers for watching.
Thanks for having me.